Hi, I'm Pam Thompson, and as we start a new year, I thought I'd share some thoughts from Dave Barry about last year in his year-end review. Dave Barry is a Pulitzer Prize-winning humor columnist and author. The best thing we can say about 2022 is it could have been worse. Anyway, it's over. But before we move on to 2023, it's time to don surgical gloves, reach deep down inside the big bag of stupid that was 2022, and see what we pull out, starting with January, which begins with the world entering the third or possibly eighth year, nobody remembers anymore, of the pandemic. The American public is seriously divided. Everybody who's wearing a mask hates everybody who isn't wearing a mask, and vice versa. Both sides are 100% supported by the science. According to the polls, the two biggest concerns of the public by far are the pandemic and the economy. Consequently, Congress is focused laser-like on the Senate filibuster rule. This is a legislative tactic that is evil when the other side uses it, but good when your side uses it. At the moment, the Democrats want to change the rule. So, of course, the Republicans, led by Senator Mitch, I am smiling, damn it, McConnell, are opposed to changing it, which means Washington is consumed by a bitter, vicious, nasty, name-calling battle pitting the Democrats against Senator Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who are also Democrats. In the end, as so often the case with these burning issues that concern the nation's capital, nothing happens, which is the whole point of the constitutional system of checks and balances put into place by the founding fathers, all of whom, and this is a testament to their wisdom and forethought, are dead. In financial news, more and more people are buying cryptocurrencies, which appeal to investors because the cryptocurrency market is not controlled by the government. Instead, it is controlled by 13-year-old Justin Wiebelmonger of Teaneck, New Jersey, who runs the whole shebang out of his PlayStation 5. Justin also controls airfares. Speaking of trouble, in February, there is trouble in, of all places, Canada. The news up there is that the capital city, Ottawa, from the Algonquin word Ottawa, meaning Washington, is besieged by a massive protest convoy of trucks clogging the streets, honking horns, blocking traffic, and making it impossible for anyone to get anywhere. Granted, this is the situation pretty much every day in, say, New York City, but apparently in Canada, it's a big deal. As tensions mount, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, in a controversial move, invokes emergency powers, enabling the government to freeze the protesters' access to beaver pelts. In all seriousness, the Canadian trucker strike is a significant event that raises some important issues which everyone immediately stops caring about because of the situation in Ukraine. Ukraine is a nation that, through poor planning, is located right next to Russia. This is unfortunate because Russian President Vladimir Putin, a man who relaxes by putting kittens into a food processor, has long wanted to establish closer ties with Ukraine, in the same sense that a grizzly bear wants to establish closer ties to a salmon. On February 24th, the Russian army invades Ukraine. Everyone assumes that the Russians will easily prevail, but the Ukrainians put up a surprisingly strong resistance. We are usually using the term resistance in the sense of physically fighting back. as opposed to tweeting defiant hashtags. Most of the world rallies around the underdog Ukrainians and their charismatic president, Volodymyr Zelensky, a former comedian and actor who is basically the opposite of Vladimir Putin. Although, to be fair, if Putin did comedy, he would kill. On the medical front, many states and municipalities dropped their mask mandates as elected officials become aware of new scientific data showing that there is a strong statistical correlation between enforcing mask mandates and not getting reelected. And excitement in March. Will Smith slaps Chris Rock during the Oscars and is arrested for assault. No, that's what would have happened to a non-celebrity such as yourself. Will Smith, on the other hand, sits back down, shortly thereafter receives an Oscar and a standing ovation. This incident results in a massive outpouring of media think pieces from media thinkers pondering the significance of the slap. This story dominates the news for days, receiving far more coverage than the war in Ukraine, which is still going on, but which is unfortunate from a public relations standpoint because it does not involve any American celebrities. In late legislative news, the Senate passes a bill that would make daylight saving time permanent, meaning Americans would no longer have to adjust to a time change twice a year for no apparent reason. The bill is referred to the House Languishing Committee, thereby guarding against the danger that Congress might actually accomplish something useful. Speaking of fundamental American institutions in peril, in April, Elon Musk says that he wants to buy Twitter for $44 billion, which works out to $1 for every apocalyptic tweet emitted about the sale by alarmed, verified Twitter users who are deeply concerned about the precedent of allowing billionaires to purchase major media platforms, which have traditionally been small and pop operations like the Washington Post and Facebook. Another verified concern is that Musk favors free speech, which we are putting in quotation marks because although it sounds good, free speech, if everyone is allowed to have it willy-nilly, the public could be exposed to misinformation that has not been verified by the verifiers, as opposed to the current situation in which everything on Twitter is 100% accurate. In leadership news, Florida's combative Governor Ron DeSantis, always looking for new things to combat, takes on an insidious threat to the state's families and the American way of life: Disney. The issue is that Walt Disney Company expressed an opinion deemed unacceptable by the governor, leaving him with no choice but to sign a law that would, 1, strip Disney of its special legal status. Currently, it is classified as a kingdom. 2, require Donald Duck to put on a pair of pants. 3, require Disney to, quote, undo what it did to the governor's official vehicle, unquote. Currently, it is a pumpkin. Speaking of insidious threats, in May, Americans learned that there is a new medical danger for them to be nervous about: monkeypox. The CDC, in an official statement, notes that there are very few confirmed cases and urges the public to remain calm, adding that we all have to die sometime. The nation is shocked when an 18-year-old boy with a disturbing social media history uses a semi-automatic rifle he obtained legally to commit a horrific mass murder. 10 days later, the nation is again shocked when another 18-year-old with a disturbing social media history uses a semi-automatic rifle he obtained legally to commit a horrific mass murder. Clearly, there is nothing that could have been done to prevent these tragedies, so the nation has no choice but to wait until it is time to be shocked again. On the inflation front, food and gasoline prices soar to record highs, but Americans are able to take comfort in the repeated reminders by President Biden that all of this is Vladimir Putin's fault. In other economic news, in June, Americans grow increasingly alarmed as the price of a gallon of gasoline and the value of an average 401k plan rapidly converge from opposite directions. For its part, the White House is growing increasingly irritated by the way people keep whining about soaring inflation and the collapsing stock market and the possibility of a recession while ignoring all the positive economic accomplishments that the Biden administration has achieved despite the efforts of Vladimir Putin, who, why do people keep forgetting this, is the cause of everything bad. As the busy summer travel season gets underway, commercial aviation is severely disrupted across the nation because this is a recurring problem. Large numbers of people who have purchased tickets from the airlines are showing up at airports expecting the airlines to actually transport them to their intended destinations. They keep giving us their money, states a baffled airline industry executive, and we frankly have no idea why. Speaking of summer, on July 4th, America's Independence Day celebration is marred by a horrendous mass killing allegedly committed by a young man who had an extremely disturbing social media history, but was still able to legally obtain a semi-automatic rifle. As you can imagine, everyone is shocked. In financial news, Elon Musk announces that he no longer wants to buy Twitter and will instead use the $44 billion to buy 2 Springsteen tickets. As the month comes to a close, the economy dominates the news, with the Commerce Department reporting that the U.S. gross domestic product shrank for the second consecutive quarter. Traditionally, this has meant that we are in a recession. But President Biden reassures the nation that it is actually not in a recession for reasons clearly stated on the teleprompter. This triggers a heated debate in Washington between Democrats and Republicans about whether we are or are not in a recession. As always, the real winners are the American people. Speaking of heated, in August, a political firestorm is ignited when FBI agents search Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump's personal residence and party rental venue, and seize classified documents as well as what a Justice Department source describes as several thousand misappropriated packets of White House ketchup. Trump declares that this is part of the fake news deep state witch hunt. His opponents declare that Trump is finally, this time it's really happening, people, going to be arrested for something. And thus the Donald Trump show, now in its 373rd week, continues its seemingly interminable run on center stage of American politics, like the Phantom of the Opera, except it never gets to an intermission. President Biden announces a massive program to forgive hundreds of billions of dollars in student loan debt. Also, everybody who failed college chemistry gets bumped up to a B+. As is so often with the case with massive government programs, this is popular with the people who benefit from it and unpopular with the people who have to pay for it. Speaking of politicians, September, Ron DeSantis, who we remind you is governor of Florida, uses Florida state funds to charter 2 planes in Texas, which is not part of Florida, and has them transport a group of migrants from Venezuela, which again is also not part of Florida, to Martha's Vineyard, yet another place that is not part of Florida. This would be a hilarious gubernatorial prank, if not for the fact that these are actual human beings, as opposed to Muppets to be deployed in a cynical game of migrant whack-a-mole. Martha's Vineyard responds to DeSantis' stunt by welcoming the migrants with open arms and offering them a permanent home for nearly 2 full days before having National Guard troops ship them back to the mainland. For its part, the White House blasts DeSantis for undermining the administration's program for dealing with the humanitarian crisis at the border, which is to pretend that there is no humanitarian crisis at the border. On a sadder note, the world mourns the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the beloved monarch who reigned over the United Kingdom during its transition from the center of a vast global empire to a popular tourist destination, roughly the size of a pickleball court. She is succeeded by her 143-year-old son, King Charles the Uncomfortable, who will be officially crowned next year in a traditional British ceremony featuring numerous horses. On the financial front, in October, the national debt creeps up by yet another trillion and now exceeds 31 trillion. But again, this is nothing to worry about because it has absolutely no economic consequences. We don't even know why people bother keeping track. And speaking of money, Elon Musk announced that he has decided to buy Twitter after all, because the only Springsteen tickets he could get for $44 billion were way the hell up in the balcony. But the big story in October is politics, as voters prepare to cast their ballots in what everybody on cable TV agrees will be the most historically historic midterm elections since the dawn of time. At issue is nothing less than the fate of the nation, with the voters choosing between 2 opposing philosophies of government, as clearly laid out to the American public in several $1 billion worth of informative TV commercials. On the one side is the party of the far right, election-denying, coup-supporting, anti-democracy, environmental destroying, racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, gun-toting, pro-slavery, handmaiden, Ku Klux Klan fascists who are literal Nazis. On the other side is the party of the extreme left, anti-family, anti-border, pro-riots, criminal coddling, tax-raising, economies wrecking, godless, un-American, communist, baby-killing, groomer, pedophile, sex perverts. The choice is yours, voters. Speaking of matters of life or death importance, in November, as the historic midterm elections approach, with the fate of the democracy hanging in the balance, verified blue check marks media personalities on Twitter focus with a ferocious intensity on the single most critical issue facing the nation, if not the world: the status of verified blue checkmark media personalities on Twitter. The verified drama on Twitter is interrupted briefly by midterm elections. For weeks, the political experts relying on scientific polling data have been predicting a red wave, with the Republicans taking control of the House and Senate, as well as large swaths of Canada. The outlook is so dire that the New York Times tweets out a list of evidence-based strategies for coping with election anxiety, including, we swear we are not making this up, plunge your face into a bowl with ice water for 15 to 30 seconds. But then the voters who do not have access to scientific polling data go to the polls. It takes a while to get the final results, in part because Arizona has chosen to tabulate the vote on a malfunctioning Etch-a-Sketch. But in the end, the red wave turns out to be more of a pinkish squirt, with most of the candidates belonging to the Republican Party's loon wing losing. It's a good outcome for the Democrats, not counting the 14 New York Times readers who tragically drown in their ice water bowls. It is an especially bad outcome for Donald Trump, who, after most of the candidates he backed lose to Democrats, lashes out at the obvious cause of the Republicans' poor performance, Ron DeSantis. A few days later, Trump, having established what kind of winner he is, announces that he is, why not, running for president again. In the entertainment industry, giant Ticketmaster comes under intense criticism when millions of disappointed Taylor Swift fans discover that all the tickets to Swift's upcoming concert tour have been purchased by Bruce Springsteen. On the political front, in December, Washington is Groundhog Day, with Congress as Bill Murray. The only change is that Republicans have narrowly regained control of the House of Representatives, which means they can spend the next 2 years seeking revenge on the Democrats. For example, they could form a House Select Committee to investigate the House Select Committee that investigated January 6th. Of course, the Democrats have the Senate, and they could form a Senate Select Committee to invest the House Select Committee investigating the House Select Committee that investigated January 6th. Thus, the legislative branch of the federal government could spend the next 2 years probing itself, like some kind of deranged proctologist. And if that isn't enough political excitement, we can also look forward to 2 soul-sucking years of building up to the 2024 presidential election, which could very well wind up being a contest between, speaking of Groundhog Day, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. That's right, the voting public could face a choice between 2 men who are both, according to the polls, unpopular with more than half of the voting public, and who will both be older in 2024 than the Adirondack Mountains. But that's the kind of quirky political scenario we sometimes wind up with in this country, thanks to the unique system of government created by our founding fathers, who are rotating in their graves like hot dogs on an airport food vendor grill. But it's still the holidays, a time when we gather with loved ones from near and far, assuming the ones from far will be able to sell enough blood plasma to afford airfare. So let's forget about the past year we just went through. Let's give our loved ones a big holiday hug and enjoy this moment.